Welcome to another episode of the 813 Exchange. Today, we're happy to have Chris on the podcast, who is the president of Empad Architecture. Chris, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks.
So, Chris, talk about your passion for getting into this field, and how'd you get into wanting to be an architect? How'd you get to the position of leading a firm? And, how did that all conspire? Is it something you want to do as a kid, or is it something that you kind of got bounced into?
It did start out as a kid. Probably in my early teens, I got interested in art. And I found out my grandfather was an architect in France. My mom is French.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom said, well, why don't you go into architecture or look into architecture instead of just art, because I was interested in art. And I said, all right. So took some drafting classes in high school, liked it a lot, and chose that as my career path. So, or at least from a college standpoint. And then I went to University of Memphis in Tennessee for my first degree, and then I went to what is now called Kennesaw State in Marietta in Atlanta, but at the time it was called Southern Tech, or Poly State Tech,
Mm-hmm.
and got my professional degree. From there we moved to Florida about 25 years ago, and then I met a gentleman that was a contractor. His name was Phil Elmire, and he asked if I was interested in starting my own firm, and he would front it, and he had a lot of business. I said, yeah, it's a no-brainer. So I quit the place I was working and started the business with him as my partner originally, and eventually transferred his shares to his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And she became my partner, and she still is today. Her name's Elizabeth. And then we've been in business for 21 years now, and doing very well.
Yeah, so you kind of were in a position where you came down to Florida and you met him. So you're saying he was a GC and kind of was like, hey, I kind of want to branch off and do this as well? Or was it like, you run the business, I'll front the money? Or was it like, hey, we'll just be like in the office partners?
Yeah, he basically was running a construction company, a lot of interior type projects.
Mm-hmm.
And he fronted the money to start the business as a more or less a silent partner. So he wasn't involved in the architecture side. This was September of 2003,
mm-hmm.
and we started the business. We shared an office with him. I hired an interior designer on day one, so it was just me and another girl. And within 3 months, we were self-sufficient. We had enough business. I paid him back, and we were making our own money to support ourselves, moved into our own office, bought equipment. So he was a partner from a financial standpoint. And his wife, Elizabeth, who is, again, now my partner, was his administrative person with his company, and she worked with him. So we became very successful very quick due to his, getting us into the mix. But yeah, he wasn't involved from a construction standpoint or an architectural standpoint.
Yeah, because Elizabeth is involved in the business because she was, handling, I don't know if she still is, but she was handling the books in the beginning because I was dealing with her a lot.
Yeah, and she still is. That's her only involvement is right now is, she used to be heavily involved in marketing as well. And 4 or 5 years ago, she said, she just wants to do the book side of things. And so we all agreed to that. So now I'm the one doing all the marketing, but I like that.
Yeah. So were you working for another architectural firm before you kind of dove into this, or were you just like, hey, I'm coming down here, I'm taking a risk and starting from square one?
No. Yeah. We moved down here in 1998 to Florida. I worked for, I wanted to say, probably from 1998 to 2003, about 4 or 5 different architects, just kind of trying to find my place.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working for another architect, a good retail firm, and decided at that moment that I wanted to do my own thing, and it made a lot of sense. to be my own boss.
Do you think you wanted to do your own thing because of the idea of being your own boss, or like you were like dissatisfied because you said you went to like a couple firms and like maybe you just didn't feel like, well, there was the style, the company culture, whatever that?
There was a lot of culture that
Yeah.
I didn't like. I saw, and it still happens today, there's a lot of, a lot of big brother, or whatever you want to call it, attitude in a lot of firms that I didn't like, and I wanted to change that. And obviously that helps to be your own boss. You're not listening to anybody else, you make the rules. But I also try to instill that in Empad so that the people that work with us feel like they're part of the team, and I'm not watching them, and everybody's on their own, and we're about trying to get the job done.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's definitely how I felt. So, like for our listeners that don't know, I took on Chris as my architect for my car wash project, and gentleman by the name of Juan is our head guy, and like the thing I appreciate about the firm is, like I was saying in the beginning, is like the responsiveness. Like to me as a client, that's like the number one thing I care about. It's like, hey, if we make a mistake, we'll own it. But they don't make a lot of mistakes, which is super nice. And they're able to get the information like very quick, and like that's the number one thing is what I see like with a lot of companies that are like this style where you get like just like it's like project management firms, stuff like this, where you have like one person that manages X amount of projects. It's like what a lot of companies fail is like they either like don't give them enough work where they're not busy, or they give them way too much work where they're missing like a lot of details on their projects, and it all comes back to the ownership. So it's like, I guess a question I have for you is like, when you like, let's say you have a new worker here and they're taking on projects, do you kind of ask them like, hey, listen, how many things based on your past can you handle at once? Or do you have like an idea like typically like how many projects they could really handle at once? Because you don't want to give your customer a sloppy product, but you don't want to keep them like under busy where they're not motivated.
Yeah, it's a fine line to find that area with each person, but you figure out over 3 or 4 months of them starting here what their strengths are and how many projects they're able to handle. But still, we have regular discussions. We're a small firm. We're about 15 people, so it's easy for me to meet with them and say, hey, you're working on these 3 projects. I got this new project that's coming around. Is that something you're interested in? Can you handle that? Is that how busy are you with these 3? And so we have those discussions and see what level they're at what different stage of the project, and see if it makes sense. So but that's important. And sometimes we might, if we do overload them, then we say, hey, do you need help with this? And then we'll bring another person to help them out and try not to overload them. I would say for the most part, most project managers and project architects are working on 2 to 5 projects at any given time at different stages though. So some of them may be in production, some of them may be in construction administration, some of them may be in permitting, some may be just preliminary design, schematics and things like that.
Yeah, because you guys obviously had a majority of your work in the beginning stages before, building permit, right?
Right.
And like now it's like you're more just like, one gets on a call and, it's once a week for an hour and maybe he has to answer like 2 emails a week. It's really not too strenuous. So like, I guess what you probably try to do is like, I guess as soon as they're getting away from like they got permitted with this project, you could start introducing another project to that person, and that kind of keeps things like good, because if you have like a guy doing 5 projects but they're all like in the permitting stage, you're kind of like he's gonna be a little stressed out.
Yeah, he's gonna be scrambling, and that's not easy. So it's usually spread out in different stages, different type of projects.
Yeah, no, and that's extremely important. And I think that 2 to 5 number is a good number. It seems like when I talk to other people, that's like what they can handle at once and without getting sloppy.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing. So Empad starts in 2003. You're here today. What's been the biggest change in, whether it's just like how you guys approach things or how you guys see things from like, a while ago? Because like as you go on, you always look back and say, wow, I was so, stupid about this, or I should have known this? Like, what's the biggest like leap you guys made in 20 years that like you can't stress enough if somebody's out there and they're, you know, wanting to be an architect one day?
I think there's a lot of things that haven't changed that I see. And what I mean by that is we have always had a construction mind as well as an architecture mind with projects, meaning that we don't have big heads, we're not pompous, we're not trying to make things, we want to design projects that are realistic in detail and in construction, materials, and price. So we've done that from day one, and I think that comes from, you know, my original partner as a contractor. So that's helped us with our clients. They know that we're not going to over-design something and make it below the budget. And I think that is the biggest part of how we've stayed true from since 2003 till now that hasn't changed, and that's helped us. I think the only thing that the biggest change that I see is marketing, you know, has expanded for us because we're in a lot of different sectors than we were originally. And me and Sean marketing as much as we do. And we also have a new intern, Valentina, she's marketing. You mentioned Juan, he's out there marketing. So, you know, everybody has a stake in the company, and that has changed.
Yeah, so you get more people that are, you know, passionately involved. And I mean, so, you know, important factor you just brought up, which, you know, is like one thing I got warned about before I got into this entire thing, before I met anybody, was like, hey, like, you know, when you want to come up with a fancy design for your building, just remember, like, there's a price to pay for that.
Yeah.
Now, when I came into it, I remember I just came in here the first time with you, and this is before you had the Ebor office, which we'll talk about, but yeah, I just remember I'd be like, oh, I want the building to look like if Apple came into the car wash business.
Yeah,
and I just want to be the most
conversation.
modern and coolest one out there. And but I didn't come in where I was like, our construction budget must be, you know, $2.7 million or 2.3 or 3.1. Like, it was just, I want the building to look cool. Now, I wouldn't change a thing with how we're doing things. I'm actually like, I always say like the extra, like what we're paying for like our design is going to be worth it, especially once it's done. It's going to look great. But I think like if I were to advise myself again, I would say like come in and be like, okay, this is what we want to build. We have this land under contract, zoned for what we want to build, but like we got to set a budget, right? Because as the projects go along, like, and you're accruing interest, and now permits taking you an extra 3, 4, 5 months than you thought, you know, then you start to feel it, and you're like, oh, I gotta scramble, I gotta make money happen, blah blah blah, I gotta refinance out of this bridge loan or whatever. So like really coming into it with a finance perspective is super important, because you know, as you see, you know, and it happened with our project, more so on the site side, not really the building side, but you know, it took longer than expected, and you know, you notice it. So I think it's super important for the listeners that whether, you know, they want to develop it themselves, they want to get the contract to build it, it's like time is money in this business.
Absolutely.
And money is money in this business. And definitely what we did with you guys is we went back like right before permitting, and I think we said like, hey, what can we value engineer? And like some stuff, it was like pretty, like I didn't change anything off the look of the building. All I did was say, okay, like what is stucco that we could replace with block, you know, like vacuum areas, stuff like that. So it's important that, you know, if you get into this, you come into it, you know, especially from my first experience ever doing this, like, you know, from beginning to the end, that you come into it cost conscientious, because rates are also always moving.
And materials and labor and unforeseen things that come up with the site, you know, we've had projects with fire line issues, sprinklers, bad soils, like you said, time with permitting, those kind of things. You gotta anticipate. I like exactly what you're saying. You got to establish a budget, but anticipate there's going to be problems. There's going to be changes. Having a contingency for that, if you can incorporate that in, so that you know, you got this much money you're going to put into it, and you got this much contingency to cover those unforeseen things.
Yeah, I mean, I always think like you got to look at it. So like in our business, like, you know, when people do projects, they get like a pro forma, right? Because they're going to go build something, they need revenue projections to take to the bank, and typically when they take those to the bank, like that's how they're looking at it, because, you know, it's not a building that's up yet producing revenue. So, you know, how I like to look at it is when I figured the math, and this is where I started to get really smart, was I said, okay, let's just assume this thing's going to cost 20% more to build out, and let's just going to assume it's going to do 20% less than the projections. And if the numbers still work there, then it's a good project. So, definitely super important, because, you know, delays will come, you know, things will run over, you know, should be change orders. A change order is a good subject. So like when you guys do a project that like is typically 12 months or less of construction, how many change orders do you see typically? And are there ever projects that are like almost flawless? Because it doesn't seem like, you know, from my experience in construction my entire life, that just doesn't exist, you know?
I would say it just seems like there's always change orders. I don't know why that is, and just looking at our projects, usually renovation projects have more change orders because there's unforeseen things in the building. You go in and, you know, the architect and the engineers, when we go review the building and do a survey, we can only look at so many things. We can't see what's behind that wall, or in some cases above the ceiling or structure. So you go and you start renovating, the contractor says, oh, we didn't know there was a column in that wall. So how do you deal with that? So now you have a change order. Those are kind of expected, and I think any developer or somebody renovating should expect those from renovation projects. From ground up, though, if you have a good contractor and they ask the right questions during bidding, we should avoid most change orders, unless, again, unforeseen site issues like bad soils or municipality, fire marshal, building departments makes us do something that we didn't expect. Those things come up, and those can be change orders. But the overall building itself, a good contractor should be able to look at the plans, and if he does see a discrepancy or something missing, he'll bring that up and say, hey, what about this? And we'll, you know, deal with that then, before you get a contract that you're signing with that.
Yeah, and you know,
contract.
It's interesting. What I realize is, like, you know, what's happening right now is like a lot of people from New York and the northeastern states are coming down here to do business, and you know, like my dad had brought it up to me. He's like, these guys are working on how much? Like, thank you for tuning into the 813 Exchange podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. What it was, I think it was like the crane sub for the tanks. Like, we'd called like 3 or 4 people. Nobody even responded on the phone. So it's like there, you know, for like, you know, for people that look at certain markets, like whether it's something like crane rentals, it's something like architecture, it's something like plumbing, it's like, you know, you might see like 5 or 7 guys doing it, but that doesn't mean there's no opportunity for you. Like, there's, as long as you're super responsive and you're taking on a manageable workload, there's definitely still that opportunity in the United States to get into stuff that people have been doing for 100 years, but be able to do a little bit better.
Yeah. There's I would recommend anyone, you know, coming from my side of the business in architecture, to start their own thing, because you're right. There's architecture firms are busy, really busy, and the one thing that clients want is responsiveness and being able to actually be on the project when they're asked to, and a lot of these firms are not able to do that because they're just so busy. So come into the market and put yourself in front of these companies and say, look, let me help you out. That's what I'm here for. And I think you can go a long way, and that's kind of what we did, what I did to get started, and it worked. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I think the future of Tampa is, you know, you see all that's going on in the city. And I think, I'm not going to say Tampa's ever going to be like a Manhattan or San Francisco, but it definitely is going to be more towards like a Boston in 10 years with how, you know, much planned development's going on in the city. I'm kind of interested. I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I'm kind of interested to see what happens with the Rays, because it seems like this new arena or stadium's not going to happen in St. Pete now. You know, a lot of people are upset. They don't want their property taxes increased, you know. city was saying it'd be like a $2,500 increase per year on people's property taxes. A lot of the people, I feel like in St. Pete, like from a populist view, are just like, just get rid of the team here. And it's funny because like I grew up in an area in New York, Westchester County, which is about 50 minutes an hour outside the city, where it's just like, we never made a big deal about driving 50 minutes to go to a Yankees game, or an hour to go to MetLife to see the Giants or Jets, or driving to the train station, getting on the train to go see the Knicks or the Rangers. But down here, it's like they want it like close, and I mean it would be better, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens this year with Steinbrenner Field, because I could see these games for like the Rays total attendance that they get. I could see all these games being like a packed arena, packed stadium, and I could see like people being really excited over it and being right there, and I could see them have a different view towards things after the season's over.
Yeah, that's true. I hope they're not too hot out there or too wet, because that was one nice thing about the Trop.
Yeah,
there was several games I was at the Trop watching the Rays, and it was thunder and lightning and raining like you did not want to be outside, but we're inside nice and safe watching a game. But everybody loves to be outside. They want that open arena for baseball, just like football. So I get it. And you're right. There is a mentality in Tampa Bay that anybody in Pinellas thinks it's too far to drive to Tampa, and everybody in Tampa thinks it's too far to drive to St. Pete, even though it's the same distance if you're in Manhattan going somewhere. But that's just that mindset.
I think the only little bit of a difference though in New York is like, you have the trains and the subways, which has been a lot of that on the news lately. It hasn't been what it used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I started noticing it bad like when I was leaving high school in like 2016, and I was just like, okay, it's a little iffy and dirty. But we used to just, we would go to Knicks and Rangers games. We would just get on Metro North and go straight up into oh my God, I can't believe I was blanking on this, but Grand Central.
Yeah.
That was a convenient way to go, and you didn't want to drive into Manhattan, put it that way.
True. Yeah, if we had some kind of transit system here, that would be fantastic. I mean, I would love for them to have the Bright Line come from Orlando to Tampa to St. Pete, because we would take it all the time to Orlando, and even down to Miami.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like one thing. So I guess I am fitting into my rhetoric there, because I would go to a Magic basketball game if it went straight to Orlando and back.
Yeah.
Especially trains, they move fast. It's funny. It's like we have all this infrastructure in the United States, but like when I'm in Italy, the trains go like 200 miles per hour in Germany.
Yeah.
And then here it's like we have like doing this, and it was like a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we said, here's what we were able to do other projects for, but then you were saying like 5 years ago how much cheaper they were able to do for the same project, and you're looking at like a 20% difference in build out price.
Yeah.
Which is big, as you have bigger projects, it just becomes a bigger number.
Yeah, and think about if these tariffs go through, it's supposed to start today, how much that's going to affect the next building. Now you're talking about another 25-30% increase from what you're paying today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting. I don't know if it's going to be used as more of like a threat and then lay over.
True.
I think that's like a lot of people's philosophy.
I think it's good in the fact that it could bring businesses back to the United States, to factories and manufacturing and jobs. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's
at the end of the day, that's the purpose of it. But.
Yeah, that is always the purpose of it. So I mean. It's always like
other office. We actually looked at Sarasota originally. We had looked to acquire a firm down there, and they had an existing office. We were going to acquire them and move down there. That deal didn't happen. Then we actually looked at Orlando, and I was talking to some people starting up a firm there. And then we kind of pulled back, and we looked at Tampa. And the reason we chose Ybor was exactly what you said, is that's where a lot of architects are and engineers, and it's historic, it's eclectic, it's vibrant, it's fun. There's a lot of activity. So we actually shared an office there for about a year with a furniture firm, and then kept looking for our own space. And then when that space that you know of came available, we jumped on it. And it also, it helped with our clients. Our clients liked us being in Tampa. Not all of them, not all of them are in Tampa, but they like that. And then we also were, you know, very conscious of where some of our employees live. Some of our employees live way north Tampa, so that made it, from a commute standpoint, a lot easier too. Those are probably our two best buddies as contractors and civil engineers. And then just word of mouth, signage, like you mentioned, seeing a project, going in one of our projects, seeing it on the road or seeing it inside and say, who did this, you know? And yeah, so that's a big part of it.
Yeah, no, so I mean, like the developers you deal with, that, like, you know, like let's just say the one that found the Publix, or you're doing the Publix with, like, are these just, so these are just like fee-based developers that do it for big retail chains versus guys that are like, I'm just building buildings for myself and my investors type of thing. So is there like a lot of that just, would you say like most of it's just out and about at events, or would you say like a lot of it is like they came across it on Google or LinkedIn?
They probably came across us on our website, or like I said, word of mouth from another developer, or maybe a contractor or a civil engineer that told that particular developer about us. And they said, hey, you know, these guys are doing it too. A lot of it's probably driven from price or responsiveness from another firm. Maybe they're not having the best of luck, or maybe they didn't have the best of luck on another project, and then they start putting feelers out.
Yeah, well, no, I understand that, and like with our project, like you guys were more on the expensive end, but I'm so happy I'm very happy I chose you, because I haven't had problems, and then other vendors where I was like, oh, just pick the cheapest one. You know, I figured out that wasn't always the best thing to do, and that, you know, in this industry you do get what you pay for, because it's like we were mentioning before, it's time is money in this, and when these projects start, they gotta go.
Yeah.
So very important part. Well, Chris, where can anybody listen to this find you guys if they want to contact you about anything?
So you can go to our website, is www.empad.net. You can find all our contact information there. We do our office here in North St. Pete. We have a Clearwater address, but it's kind of North St. Pete, and then our office in Ybor City. You can reach me or Sean, email, but website's probably the best place.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Chris, pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
for
me.
your time.
Appreciate it, Andrew.